They say they just want to help, but next thing you know, your board chair is showing up uninvited to fundraising meetings, asking to access your CRM, and giving instructions to your junior staff. Sound familiar? If you're in nonprofit leadership, I'm guessing it probably does. I know because I was there in the trenches. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who teaches nonprofit management. And as someone who knows from experience, nonprofit work, it can be messy. So let's talk about it. Today's episode is for anyone who's ever felt like they had two bosses, one with a title and one with, let's just say, some ego. Let me tell you a story. It's an anonymous story, but it's very real. And I've had similar things happen to me many times over my 2 decades in the nonprofit sector. Let's just say we have a development director. Her name is Dana, and she is a youth services director in a nonprofit. She's smart, she's committed, she's talented, and she's really good at her job. But lately, her work days have started to feel a little miserable and like a little bit of an obstacle course. And it's not because of the challenges of the job. It's not because of her donors. She has great relationships with her donors. She also has great relationships with her team members on the staff team, but her life is being made miserable because of her board president. Now, this board chair has all of a sudden started showing up at events and staff meetings. He sends Dana friendly notes, correcting language in her donor emails and letters and appeals. He even once called a donor to directly follow up on a gift without bothering to tell anyone he was going to do it. And even worse, when Dana brought this up to her own executive director, he brushed it off completely. He just wrote it off saying, hey, the board chair is just trying to be helpful. That's what our volunteers do, right? And he encouraged Dana to not take it personally. Now, here's the real talk, the harsh reality. Friends, this is not helpful. This is not what volunteers do. This, plain and simple, is governance outreach, and it's a leadership failure. And I know this because I teach it, but also I have been in Dana's shoes. I have so many times, more times than I can count in the nonprofit sector, had volunteers, not just the board chair, but of all different positions and all different years of experience, including newbie volunteers, blow into the office and try to micromanage my staff and even try to micromanage me. I've had board members come in and try to yell at my staff. I've had them try to issue directives and tell my team what to do, bypassing me completely as executive director. So if this happens in your nonprofit, let me tell you, you're not alone. In fact, I would venture to say this is probably more common than it is uncommon. But if you're in a leadership role in a nonprofit, be it a volunteer leadership position or staff position that's in leadership, you cannot let it slide. But first, let's dig into why this happens and then what you can do about it. Now, here's what's really going on. Most people who aren't in this nonprofit, crazy, chaotic world, they do not understand the role of the board. And frankly, I've encountered a lot of people inside the nonprofit world who also don't fully understand it either. In fact, while I no longer work for nonprofits, I'm on nonprofit boards, and I just saw this power play and this misunderstanding of the board governance role happen in real life in one of the nonprofits where I serve. So let's get this crystal clear. In a governing board, the board chair's authority does extend to supervising the executive director. So there is a governance role in a governing board, that's why it's called a governing board, but that extends to the supervision and oversight, hiring and firing of the executive director. But that's it. That's it. The ED is the only staff member that they are supposed to manage. Everyone else, they're supposed to report up through the org's operational structure. Now, it's important to note that if you operate in a nonprofit that has an advisory board, the board chair has no formal authority at all. Zero, zilch, zip. They cannot hire, they cannot fire, they cannot issue directives. They're advisory. That's why it's called an advisory board. So it's really, really important to make those boundaries clear. And in one of my nonprofits, we operated with an advisory board. And sometimes my chair or my board members didn't fully understand that. So I had to make sure that they understood the role, the difference between a governing board and an advisory board, and also what their role and their lines of authority were or were not as a member of an advisory board. So this is where onboarding is really important. If your onboarding is weak and you're bringing in new board members, especially a board chair, with job descriptions that are vague or non-existent, you're setting yourself up for failure. And if you're a staff member who works in an organization and your executive director doesn't do that and doesn't push back when volunteers and board members violate those boundaries, you're also going to have a problem. You're going to end up with board members who act like middle management. And what's going to happen is staff is going to spiral into burnout. Now, let's pause there because burnout, it's not just a staffing issue. And this issue with the blurred lines, that's also not just a volunteer issue. All of these things They're job design problems. Now, I have a post on job design for nonprofit leaders, so I'll break it down for you here. We have 4 strategies when it comes to job design: specialization, job rotation, enrichment, and enlargement. And I'll drop a link to my article down below that explains it all in depth. But for purposes of this video, what I want you to know is what they all have in common is this. These things create clarity and they create purpose. And clarity is the antidote to chaos. So if Dana is spending half her week second guessing herself, double checking edits from someone who is not her boss, and cleaning up board meddling and wasting time in these meetings with board members trying to supervise her when they're not her boss, that is a signal. Her role is not designed to succeed. It's designed to absorb dysfunction, and that is not okay. But it is fixable. Here's what I would recommend you do if this kind of thing is happening in your nonprofit organization. First, you have absolutely got to clarify roles in writing. Having a lunch with a new board chair, chatting it up, chopping it up, that is not good enough. You got to put it in writing. If you don't already have board role descriptions and a governance orientation, if you have a governance board, now is the time to do it. It's not too late. I don't care if your board chair is a year and a half into her 2-year term, it's never too late. And if you're an executive director watching this next one is in your lane. What you need to do, second, is to revisit your staff job descriptions. You need to make sure that your team members are empowered to do their jobs without interference. Make sure their job responsibilities are clear, not vague. Make sure they don't overlap, and make sure that they aren't open to ambiguity and board suggestions. So when it comes to job enrichment and specialization, they're not just HR buzzwords, they're not just academic things we teach in management, but they're real life stuff. These are your retention strategy. Staff need to know what they own, what they're accountable for, what autonomy and authority they have, and who actually is their boss. Third, coach your board chair. And yes, this can be super awkward. I've had many awkward conversations with board chairs over my career. I've had some come to Jesus conversations with board chairs. But you can frame it as a strategic partnership. Say something like, hey, I appreciate how invested you are in our success. I appreciate your passion for mission. But to make sure that our staff team can do their best work, I just want to clarify and level set how we handle operational decisions versus governance oversight. And if you're an advisory board, you absolutely got to have the conversation about what an advisory board does, and that's not to govern. You can also ask your board to schedule a governance training session. I've done this before with organizations that are having issues with clearly defined jobs and poor job design, and I have seen the result be an entire dynamic shift within just a short period of time. So a governance training session can go a long way. Fourth, and maybe the most important, you gotta have the back of your staff. If you're an executive director and your team is coming to you telling you that there are board members overstepping their boundaries and overstepping that line, believe them. Hear them, listen to them, let them vent, but you have to address it. You can't just ignore it. You can't just try to say, well, I don't want to create any drama, just deal with it. You have to have their backs. And you have to protect the integrity of your organizational structure. Protecting that structure is just important as protecting your mission because the two are inextricably linked. Because when staff feel like they have no protection from board interference, let me tell you what's going to happen. They're going to start looking for jobs where their boss actually has their back. Here's the thing, board chairs, they mean well, they really do. Even my most unhinged board chairs, and I have had some of them, I know that that passion came from a good place. They cared very deeply, but that does not excuse overreach. And it doesn't mean that your team should be navigating multiple layers of unearned authority. So the next time your board chair comes in and tries to manage your team, you gotta step in, set those boundaries, and always remember, if your board chair is doing your job, then no one is doing theirs.